Chapter 30 Spellbreaker Part 1. The magic feather fluttered in a non-existent breeze as it floated through the forest. The path it traveled was straight, uncaring for the others that trailed behind it. Somewhere between the feather and myself, Twilight was trying to navigate through the Everfreeze underbrush. I couldn't see her through the shadows. She had dispelled her magical light long ago. Something had to have dragged Applejack and Fluttershy off, and we both agreed that it wouldn't be in our best interest to let it see us first. The forest canopy strangled the moon's light, and our only guidance was the dim glow coming from the feather. Shadows twisted, and shapes of the trees danced around us, leaving plenty of room for the imagination to run wild. I'd lived in this forest long enough to know that there would always be something new to surprise me, and I kept my hatchet close in hand, in case any new surprises decided to sneak up on us. The chilling air was quiet, broken only by the faint rustles wherever Twilight was, and the occasional snaps of twigs beneath my feet. I wasn't sure if my shivering came from the cold or adrenaline. My jacket was still tied tightly around my waist, and it constantly snagged against the limbs of the brush I waded through. The thought to put it back on and cover my exposed skin had occurred, but I couldn't afford to stop and lose sight of the guiding feather just for a little extra comfort. Eventually, the stillness of the air was replaced by the distant shouting of a brash voice. The feather was heading directly towards the source. The closer we drew, the more familiar it started to sound, but it wasn't a voice I was expecting to hear.
You hear me? Let me out of here so we can see how tough you are against a pony who will fight back! Rainbow Dash, would you cut it out? You ain't helping nothing getting all riled up like this.
Somewhere in front of me, Twilight gasped sharply. I could see movement beneath the brush as she quickly moved ahead. Thankfully, the shouting seemed to mask the noise we were making. I hurried at my own pace to catch up.
You're all going to regret this once the princess sets us free!
Rainbow continued to shout.
When I get my hooves on your wooden muzzle, I'm gonna make you wish you never crawled out of whatever hole you came from! Rainbow Dash!
The trees gave way to a small clearing. I kept myself low, with my head just above the underbrush to see. Under the moonlight, a wooden cage stood in the middle of the trampled open area. Ponies were uncomfortably packed within, all still in their festive costumes. Most of them cowered as far back as the cage would let them, but two remained at the front. Rainbow Dash was swiping a hoof between the wooden bars at the four Timberwolves watching over them, and a hatless Applejack was struggling vainly to hold her back. One of the wolves crouched low before her as she continued to shout, just outside of her reach. I could hear it snarling from here, a threatening sound sprinkled with even more ferocious barks. It didn't faze the Pegasus, though. If anything, it only spurred her on. The largest wolf of the pack approached the snarler and batted its head with a paw, giving it a growl of its own. The snarler recoiled from the strike, and its once vicious barks devolved into pitiful whimpers as it backpedaled away. The larger wolf took its place, laid down, and silently stared at the cage as Rainbow Dash continued her rant. Off to the left, two more wolves sat, licking at mysterious wounds. One was wiry. It got up and circled the lap around the other with a slight limp, before settling back down and nibbling at its apparently wounded leg. The other sat up straight, and its forelegs were busy rubbing at its muzzle. I strained my eyes to better see the faint glint of yellow beneath its paws. It was sap, squeezing out of the cracks of the wood on its muzzle. Its mangled face looked like it had been practically punched in from the snout. Or kicked, if there was any chance it was Applejack's handiwork. Suddenly, the shouting stopped. I looked back to the cage, thinking the large wolf had finally grown tired of Rainbow shouting, and my stomach dropped. The magic feather was floating in the middle of the clearing, and all eyes were on it. The large wolf stood as the feather passed over its head and watched as it floated into the cage. The ponies parted as it entered, but I couldn't see where it stopped through all the figures. There wasn't time to get a better angle either. The wolf's eyes traced back to the path the feather followed, and it growled a sound like creaking timber. The others stood up on command, and I could feel all 4 sets of eyes boring into the bushes I hid behind. They slowly made their advance. "Twilight, how many do you think you can take?" I whispered under my breath. It was quiet enough for the wolves not to hear me, but I still expected a response. I looked around, my eyes straining to see her through the shadows. "Twilight?" Nowhere in sight, and if she could hear me, she wasn't responding. We must have separated further than I thought when we heard the others. The wolves were still prowling closer. I screwed my eyes shut and sucked in a breath. A notably bad plan was brewing in my mind, and it hinged more heavily on Twilight than I wanted to admit, but the wolves were going to be on top of me one way or another. "Wherever you are, you better be close," I hissed. I stood out of the bushes and stepped out into the clearing, brandishing my hatchet. Gently biting down on a couple of fingers, I let out a sharp whistle, as though I needed anything more to grab their attention. "Here, boy!" It was like I flipped a switch. All 4 of them released a hungry snarl and broke into a sprint. The distance was closing fast, with the largest wolf in the lead. I braced myself for the impact, but before they came too close, 4 streaks of purple light intercepted them. They tumbled and slid to a stop, and I made the most of the opportunity. The largest wolf stopped just a few feet away from me, its stomach exposed to the air. I stumbled forward and fell on top of it with my hatchet, burying the blade into its wooden hide.
That was your plan?
The other 3 wolves were scrambling back to their feet. I wrenched my hatchet out of the one beneath me and brought it back down until it stopped thrashing. A quick glance around showed Twilight out in the open, preparing another spell.
Well, I could have had a better one if someone didn't disappear on me.
I protested. The closest wolf to me had recovered, the one with the mangled face. It charged, making only a few steps toward me before freezing. Roots stretched out from the 2 legs still touching the ground, anchoring it in place. Leaves began to spring out of its wooden hide until I could barely see the beast beneath. The end result was a vaguely wolf-shaped bush.
"I disappeared!"
Twilight shouted back.
"You were behind me! If anything, you were the one who disappeared!"
The wiry Timberwolf wisened up to the magic tricks. With Twilight in its sights, it raced past me and after her as I pried my hatchet out of the larger wolf. Twilight conjured a barrier just before the Timberwolf could catch her, and it collided against the luminescent wall. With those 2 occupied, there was only 1 wolf left to worry about. As I crawled up to my feet, the finer Timberwolf crouched low to the ground, keeping its distance. The caged ponies had finally caught on to what was going on, and their cheers and shouts overpowered the signature snarl the wolf was trying to make. I took a step towards it, and it retreated 2 steps back. There was a flash of purple light behind me, followed quickly by a canine's yelp. The Timberwolf's attention shifted just past me, and with a rabid look in its sickly eyes, it snarled once more through bared teeth as it backpedaled further. I brandished my hatchet and charged, and suddenly it bolted in the other direction. I was so caught off guard I nearly stumbled. Its shadow dashed towards the tree line as it tried to make its escape. My heart nearly stopped as my imagination ran wild. I couldn't catch up with it before it disappeared. My body wound back with the hatchet, and I prayed it would hit its mark as I threw it through the air. It twirled once and landed wide to the left, and the Timberwolf vanished beneath the Everfreeze underbrush. A curse slipped through my lips, and the ponies cheered. My shoulders slumped. All the energy I had left seemed to have disappeared with the hatchet as it left my fingers. Twilight trotted up next to me, and the cheers from the ponies only grew louder.
Way to go, Twilight! Yeah, you two really showed him who's boss! Come on, let's get out of here before more show up!
Twilight and I shared a look, and I nodded towards the cage. As she hurried to the others, I began to sluggishly make my way to where I saw my hatchet disappear. Over the commotion, I could hear Applejack speak.
Oh, you two sure are a sight for sore eyes, Twilight. Once Fluttershy and I were ambushed, I was sure you'd be next.
Psh, come on, AJ. This is Twilight we're talking about, Rainbow Dash interjected. She could give those Timberwolves a run for their bits blindfolded.
Honestly, if it wasn't for Hunter, I'm not sure he would have found you.
The mares continued to talk as I searched through the grass. I was only loosely paying attention to them. Pinkie and Fluttershy's voices came up from time to time. It was a happy ending for Twilight, now that most of her friends were together again. Now if only I knew where all of mine were. My fingers raked through the grass and eventually found their prize, just in time for Twilight to call back to me.
Hunter! Did you find it yet?
I straightened myself, wincing as the muscles pulled against my lower back. I held my hatchet out in the moonlight and gave it a wave at her to answer.
Can you come here?
She called.
We have a situation.
My shoulders slumped. As if tonight needed any more hurdles. What is that supposed to mean? I groaned.
Hunter plays,
Applejack loudly chimed in. Something must have been wrong. The ponies were still in their cage, and Twilight stood helplessly on the outside. I couldn't make out their faces between the moonlight and the distance. My mind drifted back to the runaway wolf and the ticking clock we were now under. What was causing the holdup? I hurriedly limped across the clearing to the others. As I drew closer, many of the ponies sucked in sharp gasps, and a murmur began to flutter through the small crowd. Near the front, Pinkie stared at me with wide eyes and shuffled a foal behind her. Rainbow was the first to break the smothering silence when I arrived.
Whoa! Hunter, are you... What happened?
It's been a long night,
Twilight explained.
Hey, I can answer for myself,
I rebutted. But as all eyes shifted to me for an explanation, I choked. With a sigh, I echoed her words. Yeah, long night. I looked to Twilight, hoping to shift both the subject and the eyes off of me. So, what's the problem?
It's the cage,
she explained.
I don't know how, but the Timberwolves enchanted it with some sort of locking spell, and we can't break it.
That news felt like a gut punch to our escape plan. I turned away and mouthed a swear so the fools wouldn't see it. Can't you just teleport them out or something?
We already tried that,
Rainbow cut in bluntly.
You should have seen it,
Pinkie Pie exclaimed, a little too enthusiastically.
Twilight got Rainbow Dash out, but then the cage made all these weird noises and Rainbow popped right back in. Whatever spell Thorn has over these cages is either incredibly complicated or incredibly strong,
Twilight continued.
Either way, we could be stuck here all night trying to come up with the right counterspell.
So what's the plan then? I pressed. We can't just leave them. You heard what the princess said would happen. Hold on, the princess said what? Twilight and I winced as the bystander overheard my slip. A concerned mumbling quickly overtook the crowd. Twilight was quick to quell it.
No pony said we were going to leave you,
she assured them.
Believe me. You'll all be back in your homes before sunrise.
And Hunter's gonna get us out,
Applejack chimed in.
ain't ya?
I shot her a bewildered look, wondering why she would make such an outlandish promise, but she rose a hoof and explained herself before I could verbally object.
Thorn said something about you earlier when we all met, remember? Called you something real funny, a spellbreaker, wasn't it?
Applejack looked to Twilight for support, and when my eyes followed, she looked alarmed to suddenly be put in the spotlight.
We were entertaining the idea that he meant something by that name.
She sighed.
It doesn't seem too far-fetched, given your lack of magic and your body's reaction to it. Maybe you can do something to break the spell that's keeping them in?
What? How do you mean for me to do that? I sputtered. I don't know how any of this works. I shook my hands exaggeratedly to mark my point. Twilight shook her head, seemingly just as bewildered at the idea as I was.
I don't know either, just, I don't know, do what comes naturally.
The ponies inside echoed her encouragement. A tiny scoff escaped me at the idea. Naturally. As if there was anything natural about any of this. A lone wolf's howl rang out between the trees, though, and my decision was made for me. I stood in front of the cage, not really even sure what I was trying to do. My eyes scanned through the small crowd inside as if they would provide answers. Applejack, Pinkie Pie, and Rainbow Dash were at the front. The urgent look in their eyes offered little help for what I needed. There were plenty of foals, but among the adults, I couldn't find the one I was looking for. Beneath the sea of anxious faces, I found one nearly hidden. Fluttershy's eyes were locked on mine as she laid on the cage floor. Between the shifting bodies, I caught sight of her wing, frazzled and darkly matted against the moonlight. Something swelled within me. Even if I couldn't find Lyra, at least I had a chance to make up for past mistakes. I studied the cage, and that word echoed in my head again. Naturally. How would I naturally break a wooden cage? I reached out with my hands and grabbed a hold of two of the bars. Immediately, my skin began to crawl against the surface, and a shiver coursed down my back. The feeling was constant, and a numbness quickly accompanied it. I tightened my grip, trying to force feeling back into my fingers, but the sensation only grew, reaching deeper and deeper into my arms. The air began to hiss and pop. Deep green sparks leapt out from between my fingers. The numbness turned into a biting pain. It was as though the wood itself was trying to push my fingers away. I grit my teeth, braced a foot against the cage, and pulled back harder. With a sound like a gunshot, the wooden bars snapped apart. I fell on my back with a broken piece in each hand, gasping for breath from the sudden and unexpected impact. The pain subsided, albeit only for a new one to arise when my head connected to the ground, and my sensation gradually came back to my hands and fingers. I finally released the pieces from my hands, and my head rolled to the side to meet Twilight. Ow! Well, did it work? I groaned. She stared at me, slack-jawed with awestruck eyes. She didn't make a sound at first. In fact, compared to that booming snap, the entire forest had gone deathly quiet. I propped myself up on my elbows to see my handiwork, and past the remaining wooden bars, the other ponies gave me similar looks.
Whoa,
Rainbow Dash said, her voice barely over a whisper.
That was totally awesome!
Pinkie exploded. She burst through the crowd and wrapped around Applejack and Rainbow.
Did you see that? It got really spooky for a second there and then boom! I haven't seen fireworks that big and loud since last New Year's. And believe me, I made some pretty big and pretty loud fireworks last.
Applejack reached out to her friend and pulled her away from the bars. Hold on there, Sugar Cube. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. What do you say, Twilight? You think it worked? Twilight's response came out with an incredulous laugh.
It did. I don't know how, but it worked. Whatever spell was blocking my magic is gone. Which means...
Her voice trailed off and she closed her eyes. Suddenly, the cage around the ponies creaked and groaned. The wooden beams peeled apart and wrapped around each other in a flurry of movement. The ponies flinched and ducked away from the whirlwind around them. Even I felt the urge to crawl just a little further back. But it ended just as quickly as it had started. And when it did, the cage was gone. Only a handful of pine saplings loosely arranged in a square was left. The ponies hesitantly filed out, unsure of their newfound freedom. But once the last crossed the threshold, their uneasy caution melted into a restless excitement. I laid back down, nestling my head against the cold dirt, and allowed my eyes to close for a job well done. As I rested, I could overhear the others discussing their escape plan. Out of the crowd, Applejack was the first to raise her voice above the others. All right, every pony, let's get our heads together. We ain't out of the woods yet. Somewhere to the side, Pinky snorted. I'm sure y'all want to get back to your homes just as much as I do. Now, grateful as I am for Hunter for saving all our skins, he might have made enough noise for the whole dang forest to hear, and I reckon we ought to make ourselves scarce before the wolves come back to investigate.
Applejack's right. The girls, Hunter, and I all have plenty of experience traveling through the Everfree Forest.
Twilight followed up. Something nudged my shoulder. My eyes cracked open, and I found Fluttershy standing above me. Her mane was disheveled, her eyes tired, her smile soft. As Twilight continued to speak, she mouthed the words, "Thank you."
It's going to be a long journey back, but so long as we stick together, we will make it back safe. Let's go home, every pony.
That was the cue. After returning Fluttershy's smile with a weak one of my own, I closed my eyes and sucked in a deep breath to gather the strength to get up. No sooner than I did, Rainbow Dash's urgent voice rose over the excited murmurs of the crowd.
Twilight, wait! We can't leave yet!
My breath pushed out with what almost could have been a groan, echoing the disgruntled sentiment of the crowd at the news. Others were fast to voice their concerns.
What do you mean, wait? Don't you know where we are? It's too dangerous here. Hey, we're not the only ponies stuck out here.
Rainbow Dash shouted over them. Their complaints gradually died down, although I could still hear the occasional grumble.
There's more. The group I was caught with.
Rainbow explained, softer, probably directly to Twilight.
I promised them I'd find help and come back to them. We can't abandon them out here. Who knows what the Timberwolves will do?
I'm afraid we got a pretty decent idea, Applejack replied. Remember what the princess said about Thorn's plan, Twi?
This time, Pinky interrupted.
Thorn? Who's that?
A Timberwolf, Applejack answered. And a real big one at that.
And scary,
Fluttershy timidly added.
More importantly, he's the Timberwolf's leader.
Twilight said grimly.
He's the reason we're all here tonight, and he won't stop until he gets whatever it is he's after.
I waited for the part where she would tie me into the blame. But it never came.
Wait, that's not... He's the talking Timberwolf, right?
Rainbow Dash asked.
You know him?
Barely.
Rainbow spat.
He's the one that personally put us in those cages.
A few unsettled murmurs from the crowd agreed with her. I heard the sound of a hoof striking another,
Are we taking him down?
No!
Twilight sternly countered.
We're staying as far away from him as we can for now. If the princess can't contain him by sunrise, then we'll come up with a plan. Where's the other cage?
There was a tense pause, and when Rainbow finally answered, she sounded reluctant.
It's deeper in the forest, on the other side of the castle.
The next pause was longer, but I swore if I listened hard enough, I could hear the gears in Twilight's head moving.
How many?
She didn't sound proud to ask.
It started with 6 of us.
Rainbow started.
Myself and the foals and a stallion. But then that talking Timberwolf came back with more ponies. Said he was taking 5 of us, and that was when
How many are there now?
Twilight stressed.
I'm not sure.
The Pegasus confessed with a stammer.
He took the foals and one of the mares he brought back. He tried to take me, but that's when I ran. So that would leave maybe, Carrot Top, Lyra, Firefly, what was his name, Time Turner?
My eyes snapped open as I ran the names through my head again, and my body immediately snapped up to a sitting position. The blood was quick to rush out of my head, though. It felt like a light bulb popped inside, and all that came out of me was a groan as my torso buckled over.
I don't know, 4, maybe 5.
Rainbow finally concluded.
Carrot was in the group Thorn brought to our little meet and greet,
Applejack pointed out.
Must have picked her up when Dash split. She and the rest of them ought to be safe in town by now.
But the others are still here in the forest. I finally managed to say. My eyes fell on Twilight, and I tried to look better than I felt. We're not leaving them behind,
I never said we were.
she assured me.
But we can't endanger every pony else trying to save them either. Rainbow Dash, do you remember the way back to the other cage?
Rainbow hesitated, but eventually nodded.
Yeah, I think so. I can take some pony with me and you can get everyone else out of here.
I'll go with you. I volunteered. I grunted as I stood up, and the world gently tilted as I rose to my feet. Fluttershy pulled up to my side.
I'm coming too,
She confidently announced.
Fluttershy. Hunter.
Twilight shook her head.
If any pony here deserves some rest, it's you two. You should be part of the returning group.
I'm the only one who can open the cages, though, right? I countered. I don't think there's really any other choice on where I'm going.
Don't worry, Twilight. I'll make sure he doesn't get himself hurt.
Fluttershy assured with a sincere smile. As though they were eavesdropping on us and wanted to pitch in. The cry of wolves began to echo through the trees around us. Applejack came to Twilight's side with concerned eyes.
No time to argue, Sugar Cube, she pointed out. We gotta get these ponies moving.
The crowd was quick to agree. Twilight shook her head.
Fine. You and Pinkie lead them back. I'll stay behind and help the others,
she said confidently. Her friend winced at the thought and put a hoof on her shoulder.
Look, Twi, I know this ain't the best of situations, but, well, Pinkie and I could make it back to Ponyville by ourselves. Shoot, we can handle anything this forest has to throw at us if we needed to. But with all these extra ponies, too?
There was a strained pause, and it weighed down on all of us. Applejack and Twilight stared at each other, communicating without speaking a word. Hesitantly, Applejack finally broke the silence.
I'll go with them.
She spoke with finality, and as Twilight started to object, Applejack covered her mouth with a hoof.
Look, there's only one pony in all Ponyville I'd trust to lead a group this big through a place as dangerous as this. And that's you, Twi. There ain't a word you can say that'll change my mind.
As she withdrew her hoof, I could see it trembling slightly before she stamped it firmly into the ground.
I'll make sure they get back safe. You have my word on that. And you know I always back up my words. After all, ain't I the most dependable of ponies?
Twilight shook her head in disbelief, her eyes darting between the four of us, waiting for someone else to speak out against it. The clock was ticking, though, and she knew it.
I don't like this,
she finally said. Applejack's lips pressed into a grim line.
You don't have to,
she said.
You just have to trust us.
Another stressed moment passed. The crowd was beginning to show their anxiety.
Fine. You win.
Twilight's voice barely broke a whisper. After clearing her throat, she spoke up louder for everyone to hear.
Every pony, let's go home. We've stayed long enough. Girls, stay safe out there.
Her eyes flicked up to me.
All of you.
Before I could retort, Rainbow threw a salute.
We'll be back in town before you know it, Twilight.
Pinkie Pie was already leading the group, trying to keep their spirits high. Twilight filed in behind the last filly and offered some quiet, encouraging words to her.
When you get back, be sure to come to Sugar Cube Corner,
Pinkie called in a bright voice.
You too, Hunter. I'll have special cupcakes made for all of us, and we can laugh away the slank like it never...
I looked at her at the end of what I could only describe as a full body's twitch. Her alligator costume was still subtly shaking as she stood motionless. The other ponies came to a jarring stomp around her, and she turned back. She looked like she was staring at a ghost as her eyes fell on me. Before I could even ask, she darted across the clearing and tackle-hugged me around the waist. A grunt escaped me from the impact, and I would have fallen back if she wasn't still anchored to the ground. "What are you doing?" I hissed. She removed her forelegs from around my waist and backed away, suddenly feeling everyone's attention on her.
Sorry, I just... Pinky sense.
She sniffed.
I've never felt one like that before. But it was a real doozy, and...
She shot a sideways glance to the others with worried eyes, and then up to me.
Come back safe, okay?
Without another word, she trotted back to the others, and after a brief pause, they all began to disappear into the trees, leaving the four of us alone in the clearing with our thoughts. I tried to keep mine away from that ominous farewell. The wolves called after us again, and Rainbow was quick to lead us back into the trees. We weren't moving very quickly through the Everfree Forest, although that was mostly my fault. The best speed I could manage was a hurried limp, and the other two were forced to match it. It allowed Rainbow Dash plenty of time to get caught up with everything she had missed since her last hayride, and she was insistent on knowing, too. However, as Fluttershy had spent the majority of the holiday in her cottage, and Applejack was in town, the bulk of the burden fell on me. By recalling the night, I probably spoke to her longer than every other encounter we had combined. I was more than thankful when the others stepped in to help after the meeting in the town hall.
I can't believe it,
Rainbow Dash finally said after we finished catching her up.
Tonight of all nights, too. This is supposed to be my night. The first time I'd get to have some fun since...
Her voice trailed off as her eyes met mine.
It all just happened so fast,
she said, changing the subject.
Everything was going fine every other time I took my group through the trail, but that last time... they just pounced on us. They had the fools by their necks before we even knew what was happening. I I'd never felt so helpless. And then that big talking one, Thorn or whatever, came in and started making demands, and everybody was looking at me, but I couldn't.
You did the best you could. They surprised you.
Fluttershy reminded her.
No pony could have known what was going to happen tonight.
I bit my tongue to refrain from commenting, but Rainbow wasn't easy to console.
But it wasn't the best I could have done, Fluttershy.
She pointed out.
I could have done so much more if I could still... If the princess didn't...
She stopped. In the strangled moonlight, I could only just make out her shape among the brush as she shook her head. Fluttershy moved in to offer a comforting huff, but Rainbow was talking again before she had the chance.
I shouldn't say that,
she said, quieter. She fell on her haunches and rubbed her eyes with a fetlock. She tried to speak up, only to hush herself again as her voice started to crack.
I'm not going to say I don't deserve this for what I did. I just wish other ponies didn't have to pay for my punishment too.
Oh, Rainbow Dash.
Fluttershy's comforting huff turned into a full embrace. She wrapped her forelegs around her friend and pulled her close. Applejack came up to them and offered a hoof on her shoulder.
You can't blame yourself for this, Rainbow. Even the princess couldn't have known this would happen.
I know. It's just...
She tightened her voice, trying to hide the small waver left.
It's stupid.
I shuffled over to a nearby tree and rested my back against its trunk. Though the bark bit into my back as I all but collapsed onto it, the comfort of the tree taking some of my weight was a welcome relief. But as my body was celebrating in its rest, a thought pestered my mind relentlessly throughout their conversation. A piece of the puzzle was missing for me, or perhaps a chunk of them. The back of my mind buzzed like a swarm of biting insects. The thought broke loose from my lips. What would the princess have to do with any of this? I asked absently. The others stiffened, and it opened the door to a storm of other questions. Before I could gather my thoughts enough to ask any of them, though, Applejack broke the brief silence.
It ain't our place to say, Hunter.
Her answer dodged the question. Old doubts began to roil. Almost as if she could sense this, she spoke further.
But she definitely didn't have anything to do with tonight. If nothing else, you can believe me on that. And it ain't gonna do any pony any good dwelling on the past right now,
she said with finality. Fluttershy stood back as she dusted Rainbow off.
We got a mission and a whole bunch of ponies waiting on us.
You're right.
Rainbow agreed hastily. She strode further ahead with an artificial energy.
Come on. I don't think we're too far away now. Just a little bit further.
Applejack was quick to follow. Fluttershy hesitated, looking to me first before chasing after her friends. It was as if she wanted to offer me some kind of explanation. I only followed soon after to a tugging sense of urgency. As my body groaned, my head pushed its complaints aside to focus on the strange, broken puzzle before me. They were hiding something from me.
Have you ever known them any other way?
As I trudged through the shadows of the forest, I refused to give the voice an answer.